Mr. Russell.
Here.
Mr. Schindledecker.
Here.
Mr. Slough.
Here.
Ms. Warnicki.
Here.
And Mr. Wobser.
Present.
Mr. Haas called me earlier this evening and said that he was heading to the emergency room because his wife had either broke her arm or wrist. So I would entertain a motion to excuse. Mr. Hellman, so moved. Second, Mr. Wobser. All those in favor of excusing Mr. Haas this evening, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. He is excused. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance in a moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
We will entertain a motion for the previous city council meeting minutes. Mr. Slough?
I move to approve the minutes of the July 6th regular session of council.
Second, Mr. Niemeyer. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting the July 6th regular session of city council say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. They are accepted. I need one also for the public hearing on that date. Mr. Slough?
I would move to approve the minutes of the July 6th public hearing.
Second, Mr. Schindledecker. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Here's one just real quick note on your agenda this evening under the petitions that should have read zoning of 812 Tiffin Avenue to C1, currently zoned as R3. So those two were inverted accidentally, and so please make that note. There are no other add-ons, replacements, or removals. There are no proclamations, no recognitions or retirement resolutions, no oral communications. We will begin with petitions.
The zoning amendment for 812 Tiffin Avenue from James Holtgreven with Holt Hammer Ventures LLC to change the zoning to C1 local commercial. It's currently zoned R3 small lot residential.
Questions or comments? This will be referred to City Planning Commission and Planning and Zoning Committee. We have no written communications, reports of officers and departments.
Precipitation reservoir levels for second quarter of April through June 2021.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
City income tax monthly collections report for June 2021.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Findlay Police Departmental activities report for June 2021.
Any questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Summary financial reports as of June 30th, 2021.
Any questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Treasurer's reconciliation report for June 30, 2021.
Any questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Findlay Municipal Court activities report for June 2021.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
A letter from City Engineer Calb regarding fire department portable radios.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Board of Zoning Appeals minutes for April 8th as well as June 10th, 2021.
Questions or comments? Minutes to be filed.
Mayor's monthly budget summary for June 2021.
Questions or comments? Mayor's summary to be filed.
A letter from Police Chief Ring regarding National Alliance on Mental Illness and State of Ohio Mental Health First Aid CIT Support and Expansion Project donation.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
A letter from City Auditor Stashak regarding American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. He asked that this be read.
Mr. Wilson.
Jim, in lieu of having this entire letter read tonight, it's very in-depth and it's discussing the new ARPA funds. Could you give us some information that kind of summarizes the fourth paragraph there? You were talking about the fact that we have similarities with the CARES Act, but it's significant differences also. And I know after our meetings with you and Ginger Sampson and the mayor that there are some significant differences here. And if you would give us a little bit of insight on that and give us the reason why you think we ought to get together and discuss this separately.
Actually, I think I suggest that it might be in your interest to get together. The reason that I've suggested that you consider that, as I mentioned in the meetings, the four of us that we had in reviewing this, that the federal government has put clawback provisions into this legislation and money, should you accept it, that go well into, we believe, 2020, 30 or beyond. It's, I think, 5 or 6 years beyond the last date the money can be distributed. 6 years. Last date the money can be distributed is 2024. We're looking at potentially receiving $2.1 million in the first tranche, and then another $2.1 million up to about 4.3 total over the second tranche, and then a potential redistribution. The purpose of this requested legislation is to allow me to register, to make us eligible to receive the first tranche. One of the things that's very, very important is if you don't do that, don't register and don't elect to take that money, you can't get the second or any redistribution. It's one and done there. I do not know if your body wants to put the burden of those clawback provisions on future councils going into those late periods in time. Also, there's going to be a special fund set up that money is going to be received in, and the way that's handled at this point in time, I'm not aware of any projects that are being planned for being planned that would be paid for by this money. So again, I don't know what your plans would be to do with it, and then the sooner we know, should there be discussions going on, my office, myself, and Ginger need to be made aware of those immediately, so that we can begin the research to determine if any of those projects or uses of those funds are legitimate. That was a major effort under the CARES Act, and this is even more complex in terms of the rules and regulations the federal government has put in place. So whether you have a meeting or not is certainly at your discretion. I'm not recommending you having a meeting. I'm encouraging you to consider having it. Also, the two documents attached to my letter are intended to be part of the legislation. They're actually supposed to be your Exhibit A and your Exhibit B, but I don't think they're actually attached to the one-sheet resolution that you have that's going to get the first of 3 readings tonight. So you might want to tear those off of this letter or put the letter on the back of your legislation so it's all together. But I do encourage you to read those letters or those 2 documents, which talk about most particularly some of the rules that the federal government has stressed. And if they've taken the time in the document to stress rules that are important to them, that probably means they're going to audit based on some of those rules that they've talked about. And for comparison, it's really interesting. We had our major flood and assistance from FEMA back in 2007. Those audits did not end, I think, until 2012, the second year that I was here as your auditor. And sitting in those meetings, in that case, we were talking about generators you used, how many gallons of gas did you put in the generator, who ran the generator, what was the pay rate of that individual, what did you pay per gallon of gas. Those audits are that detailed, and these are going to be every bit as detailed with regard to those projects. And we are fully responsible. Even if you subgrant, we would be fully responsible. So my concern was that in consideration of the legislation, first off, if you just want to make yourself eligible, we need to pass the resolution so that I can move forward and register. And then second, when it comes time to it, whether you accept the money or not, and if you're willing again to put the burden of those clawback provisions on future councils and future staff. The likelihood of my staff being here in the 2030s is not very high. A number of them have their retirement dates posted next to their desks.
Jim, the timeline on registration then allows us to go 3 readings or not?
Yeah, I think I said in the letter that I need this passed by your second meeting in August, okay, so that we can register. I think I want to say September 4th, and the bottom of the letter there is my registration deadline. And so if you pass it your second meeting in August, I have time to get that registration completed. It's going to be interesting, though. One of the big differences between this and the coronavirus is how we register. We have to have, it's a a non-password site where you register, so your information and everything they ask for, the complete package, has to be complete when you sit down to do it. There's no save function. You can't start to register and then walk away. So it's going to be a heck of a process that day when we go to register.
Very good. Thank you for that information, and thanks to your office for keeping up with this. And Ginger does an outstanding job of keeping up with these very onerous rules and regulations that they've set upon us for this money. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Letter to be filed. Committee reports.
The Strategic Planning Committee met on July 6, 2021 to continue June 15, 2021, May 4th, 2021, April 20th, 2021, March 16, 2021, and March 2nd, 2021 discussions on the finalization of an RFQ for a contractor to assist with the initial data gathering for the strategic plan, as well as review Baker Tilly feedback. We recommend inviting the following 4 groups to submit a request for proposal: American Structure Point, Gossman Group Design and Planning, MS Consultants in Planning, and Planning Next. These groups were chosen based on a matrix of scores developed by the committee.
Mr. Rossi.
Move for adoption of the committee report.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Discussion. Mayor?
I guess just one point of clarification, is that additional language on, maybe I'm just misunderstanding, sorry, on the agenda, it references the Baker Tilly feedback, but I think that that was from a prior meeting. So I think that just point of clarification on the agenda, I think it just has some old language where the report itself is accurate. Is that, I'm looking
Well,
at other committee members just to make sure that's correct.
You should have a committee report in front of you, everybody. I'm not sure exactly what it reads, but
Yeah, so the committee report that should be up for adoption is: the committee met to vet the 10 RFQ proposals submitted using a matrix of scores. The committee narrowed the field to the 4 groups, including American Structure Point, Gossman Group, MS Consultants, and Planning Next. And on the agenda, it just has some language in there that I think is just from an old meeting where it
Correct.
talks about Baker Tilly feedback.
I'm pretty sure, Mary, that's exactly what it was. It was left over from an old meeting.
okay.
So
Thank
you can take
for the
and strike that
clarification.
from there.
Are there any other questions or comments? Having a first and a second, all those in favor of the committee report say aye. Any opposed, nay. The committee report is adopted.
The Strategic Planning Committee met on July 12, 2021 to review requests for proposals from American Structure Point, Gossman Group Design and Planning, MS Consultants, and Planning Next. We recommend to continue discussions of the RFP on Monday, July 19, 2021 at 5 p.m. in the 3rd floor conference room of the municipal building.
Mr. Wobser?
Make a motion to approve.
Second, Mr. Schimmeldecker. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the committee report say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. The committee report is adopted. Legislation, we'll start with resolutions.
First reading for Resolution 15, 2021, a resolution authorizing the city auditor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to apply for the American Rescue Plan Act dollars on eligible expenditures as specified in the United States Treasury's Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds Interim Final Rule, eventually the final rule, and declaring an emergency.
Okay, ordinances.
Third reading for ordinance 2021-56, an ordinance vacating a certain portion of a certain alley hereinafter referred to as the Wilson Street Vacation in the city of Findlay, Ohio.
Mr. Saab.
I would move for adoption of ordinance 2021-056.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
And Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-59, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Okay, next.
Second reading for ordinance.
Just a second.
Mr. Russell? Nope.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-60, an ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the city of Findlay, Ohio, to enter into a project agreement with the Ohio Department of Transportation for Federal Transportation Alternatives Program funds for the Han Greenway Trail, Phase 2, PID 109009, project number 31993800, and declaring an emergency.
Now, Mr. Russell.
In order to save Denise from having to read it a third time. But this has been a well-discussed project, and this just gets us with an agreement with, and continues the process. I believe that our council statutory rules be suspended and this ordinance be given its third reading.
Second, Mr. Hellman. All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give this ordinance its third reading.
Ordinance 2021-60.
Mr. Hellman.
Move for approval of ordinance 2021-059.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Any discussion?
He referenced the wrong one.
Oh,
I think we need 060, right?
I'm sorry. I take that back. That would be ordinance 2021-060.
thank you for the clarification. Second, Mr. Greeno. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance 2021-060 say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer, or Hellman, excuse me.
Aye.
Oh, goodness.
Thank you, Mr. Hellman. Okay, next. Oh, I'm sorry, the ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-61, an ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the city of Findlay, Ohio, to enter into a project agreement with the Ohio Department of Transportation for the Han Bright Road Phase 2 fiscal year 2022 resurfacing PID 108772, project number 32811-800, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
So this is an opportunity to work with ODOT and have ODOT pay a significant portion of Bright Road resurfacing. It worked well when we did the section we did this year. I say let's strike while ODOT's still at the table, and for those reasons I suggest, or I move that council statutory rules be suspended and this ordinance 2021-061 be given its third reading.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
And Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its third reading.
Ordinance 2021-61.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2021-061.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of ordinance 2021-061 say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
And Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-63, an ordinance authorizing the service safety director of the city of Findlay, Ohio to advertise for bids where required and enter into contracts for various projects, appropriating and transferring funds for said capital expenditures and declaring an emergency. Second reading for ordinance 2021-66, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency. Second reading for ordinance 2021-68, an ordinance amending certain provisions of codified ordinance number 2020-121 of the city of Findlay, Ohio, known as a salary ordinance, to add a new position of airport operations coordinator effective on or before August 1st, 2021, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
We had Mayor Ficker here at our last meeting, and the reasons for this position and the desire to get this process moving were pretty well stated. And we didn't suspend at that point in time because it was add-on legislation. Now that it's had a meeting to sit and have us give it consideration, I think it would be appropriate that we speed this one up. And for those reasons, I move that council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2021-068 be given its third reading.
Second, Mr. Hellman. All those in favor of suspending the rules, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Nay.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Council rules have been suspended and the clerk will give the ordinance its third reading.
Ordinance 2021-68.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2021-068.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2021-69, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Wobson.
This legislation goes along with what we discussed at the last meeting. It's just giving us a very nice discount for these radios. For that reason, I'd like to go ahead and get this done. We're working on an end of January deadline on these for this purchase, so I'd like to suspend council's rules on ordinance 2021-69.
Second, Mr. Greeno. All those in favor of suspension of the rules, say aye. If your name is called. Any opposed, say nay.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give ordinance 2021-069 its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2021-69, ordinance 2021-69.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of ordinance number 2021-069.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
And Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2021-70, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
This is one of these ordinances where somebody, in this case the National Alliance on Mental Illness, has given the city money. Suspending rules allows us to use the gift in its intended form, and for those reasons, I move that council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2021-070 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of suspension of the rules, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
And Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
The rules have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2021-70, ordinance 2021-70.
Mr. Palmer.
Move for adoption of ordinance number 2021-70.
Second, Mr. Schindeldecker. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of ordinance 2021-070, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted. Old business. New business. Mr. Slough.
Several months ago, this body passed I believe it's some sort of either as an ordinance or a resolution, giving $10,000 to the West End and also to the Fern. And I read just either yesterday or the day before that the West End is now closing. And I wondered what would happen with that particular amount of money, the $10,000. Where that goes, if the city can get that back, or how's that going to be handled?
Mr. Stashak can explain that.
What I can share is my understanding that the West End is reopening in August on the 12th. Is what I was informed when I met with Matt Cordonier and we had a conference call with some of the parties involved. I don't know any more than that, other than we will keep you apprised that there are, with all RLF loans, personal guarantees. And I think at this point the risk is minimal, but we'll have to see how it plays out. I can't speak for what the end result will be. But that is what I do know, is that it's scheduled to reopen on August 12th. At least that's what I've been told.
Mr. Slop?
So if it does not open, I ask the question again,
Yeah,
what happens with the 10,000?
Well, again, we have personal guarantees on those funds, so it would be like with any other loan. That money ultimately would come in, or we would work to get it in. Typically, HRPC is pretty good, and the RLF board makes those decisions as to whether terms or payment terms are what they are, what's acceptable to that board. We've had cases in the past where people have requested that they don't pay it, or other things have happened. The board's been pretty steadfast at keeping our money coming in, and they do a good job. I'm ex officio on that board. The one exception to that would likely be if there was a bankruptcy and that was disallowed in a bankruptcy. But in this situation, we're aware of what's going on minimally, but we are staying abreast of it and I keep you informed.
Thank you, sir.
Any other new business? Mr. Russell?
A couple of items. First, just advance notice, Planning and Zoning Committee on August 5th. We'll have a couple of items on the agenda. Recently, there's some new plaques on some downtown light poles near underneath flowers. Those are the downtown Findlay Improvement District responsible for those. They took sponsorships for flower baskets this year, and good companies like LaRich and AR Marketing and others, many others sponsored flowers, and those plaques are recognition of their sponsorship. And I would like to say that one was sponsored by I believe it's the sister of a former co-worker, Chris Tripp at Marathon, who passed away a couple of years ago. It's right in front of the Marathon building, right outside a window that she used to sit at. And so that was I've worked with Chris, and she was a wonderful lady, and I found that one pretty touching. But hats off to the DFID for coming up with this sponsorship idea, and so that's what those plaques are. And then a last item, nice Sunday night sitting on the back deck, and all of a sudden we hear the sirens rolling, and they stop a little bit too close to the house, and sure enough, over in Washington, at the corner of Washington and McPherson, is a house fire. And so I walked over with many of my neighbors to watch Findlay Fire Department and Findlay Police Department and Hanco do their thing. And it's, I'll tell you, just honestly makes me very proud of the professionalism that they show, and everything from neighbors, comforting neighbors, the lady who lived there, to when one of the firefighters brought out the lady's cell phone, and you could just tell how much it meant to her to get that communication device back in her hands. This was what nobody was hurt, all pets were out, all people were out, it was of minimal damage. A firefighter might consider this to be an easy fire, but I think any time that these folks went into a building that has smoke coming out of it, to me that's pretty amazing. And so hats off to Findlay Fire Department and to the police department and all those who respond to these things on a day in and day out basis. I just happened to see this one. It gave me a new appreciation for what they do. It was a good message for me to get, and I wanted to let the community know through this statement of how much I appreciate what our team does. Thank you.
Real quick, Mr. Russell, just a quick note that the City Planning Commission will meet on the 12th. Do you want to coordinate your P&Z with that date? I think you mentioned the 5th.
the planning and zoning commissioner is going on a 10-day bike ride tomorrow, so his dates might not have been the greatest. Let's make that August 12th.
Thank you for the clarification, and I'm sure you'll let your committee members know. Mr. Wobson.
I too wanted to make a comment about our downtown flowers. The city employees took those over this year, correct, Mayor? And sort of, okay. Well, they look great. And in fact, just on that point, I ran into a out-of-town friend of mine, didn't know they were here, from the Canton area, or downtown Findlay yesterday, and they were just raving about how our downtown looked with the flowers and the banners honoring our veterans. They thought that was exceptional, and we're just really amazed at how thriving and vibrant our downtown area is. Yes, and I had folks at my place on Saturday night. It was very much jam-packed in what I would call a very orderly cruise night. There were no accidents that I know of. So, but a lot of very loud motorcycles and cars. So it was a lot of fun. It was an enjoyable evening for everybody that came down. Second, I wanted to call a strategic planning committee meeting for Thursday the 29th. That's a week from this coming Thursday, 5 p.m. at third floor conference room. The strategic planning committee continues to move forward. We're about, I'd say, 60% done with drafting the RFP that would go out to the 4 companies that were chosen after the RFQ. And hopefully we'll finish that up here in the next couple of weeks and get it out and moving.
That'll be A-OK. Any other new business? Ms. Mayor.
Jeff, I am not available at that time. Would we be able to look at the 28th?
Same time, Mayor?
Yes.
That does not work for me. This Wednesday, correct?
Or we could do Tuesday the 27th would work fine as well.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday are bad for me, unfortunately.
Potentially, since that doesn't work for the mayor, what about earlier in the day on Friday, the 30th? How does that suit everybody? I don't know, what would work for everybody?
I'm going to be out of town for a wedding. My apologies.
Okay,
I can call in if you would like me to, but I think I probably need to be in person.
No, yeah, that won't.
So maybe Jeff, do you want to talk offline and we can
Yeah, we will.
some dates?
Instead of wasting time here, we'll figure this out and to be determined.
RFQ and RFP TBD.
TBD. Thank you, Mr. President.
Ms. Mayor.
Okay, I'll be brief. Related just to the ARPA dollars, just wanting to provide a quick update. Obviously, you haven't heard a lot of communication on that to this point. As you recall, early on, because we have a longer window to be able to determine how we're going to spend those dollars, and we still have not received the final rule from Treasury on how to use those. Haven't been bombarding you with emails. Had that initial conversation with Jim and Ginger and Jeff, obviously only C, and discussed kind of just to that end that we'll work through the process, get the final ruling, and then have discussions from there on how we best want to spend those dollars if we choose to move forward, which I believe is in the best interest of the city. We meet compliance with all other things, and I have full faith in our team and the auditor's office to be able to continue to meet those demands. So I believe that is all for me. Thank you.
Any other new business? Hearing none, I will take a motion to adjourn. Hellman, second. Russell, all those in favor of adjournment, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. We are adjourned.